charming people are useless unless you have a lot of money. Romance is a luxury for the wealthy, not a job for the jobless. People who are poor should be sensible and sensible. It's better to have a steady income than to be interesting. Now, these are the big lessons about life that Hughie Erskine never understood. Hughie is so sad. Of course, he wasn't very smart. In all his years, he never once said anything foolish or even rude. But back then, he was very handsome. His brown hair was straight. His face was sharp, and he had gray eyes. People liked him just as much with women as they did with men. And he had done everything except make money. Along with his military sword and a 15-volume history of the Peninsular War, his father had left them to him. The first was hung over his mirror, and the second was put on a shelf between Ruff's Guide and Bailey's magazine. Hughie lived on the 200 pounds a year that an old aunt gave him. He did everything possible. He had been on the stock exchange for 6 months, but there were bulls and bears. So what was a butterfly to do? He had sold tea for a little while longer, but Picot and Souchong got old quickly. He then tried to sell dry wine. That didn't answer. The sherry was too dry. In the end, he turned into nothing. A cute, useless young man with a beautiful profile and no job. It got even worse because he was in love. He loved Laura Merton, who was the daughter of a retired colonel who had lost both his anger and his stomach in India and never found them again. He was ready to kiss Laura's shoelaces because she loved him so much. The two of them were the most attractive people in London, and they didn't have any money. The colonel really liked Hughie, but he wouldn't agree to anything. He used to tell Hughie, "Come to me, my boy, when you have 10,000 pounds of your own, and we'll figure it out." At that time, Hughie looked very sad and had to go to Laura for comfort. He stopped by to see his good friend Alan Trevor one morning on his way to Holland Park, where the Mertons lived. Trevor painted. In fact, not many people can avoid that these days. But he was also an artist, and not many people are artists. His face was freckled, and he had a red, ratty beard. He was a strange, rough person. But when he picked up a brush, he was a real master, and people flocked to buy his paintings. There's no doubt that he was initially very interested in Hughie because of how charming he was. His famous quote goes, "The only people a painter should know are those who are bait and beautiful, those who are a pleasure to look at and a pleasure to talk to. At least they should, because dandies and darlings are in charge of the world." But as he got to know Hughie better, he liked him even more for his happy, sunny mood and kind, carefree personality, and he let Hughie into his workshop permanently. Trevor was the last person to work on a beautiful life-size painting of a beggar when Hughie walked in. On a raised platform in the corner of the room stood the beggar. He was very old and had a face that looked like wrinkled paper. He looked very sorry for himself. He wore a rough brown cloak that was torn and thrown over his shoulders. His thick boots were patched and cobbled, and he leaned on a rough stick with one hand while holding out his damaged hat for money. As Hughie shook hands with his friend, he whispered, "What a beautiful model." "What an amazing model," Trevor yelled at the top of his lungs. "I should think so." He wasn't the kind of beggar you see every day. What a find, dear. A real-life Velasquez. What a great drawing Rembrandt would have made of him. Poor old chap. He looks so sad, Hughie said. But I guess that for you artists, his face is his wealth. Trevor answered. Of course not. You don't want a beggar to look happy, do you? While he was sitting down on a settee, Hughie asked, How much does a model get for sitting? 1 shilling an hour. Alan, how much do you get for your picture? Oh, I get 2,000 for this. It's pounds? The guineas. You can always get guineas as an artist, author, or doctor. Well, I think the model should get a cut, Hughie said with a laugh. They work just as hard as you do. That's nonsense. What a pain it is to lay down the paint by yourself and stand at an easel all day. Hughie, it's fine for you to talk, but I promise you that there are times when art is almost as respectable as hard work. Don't talk, though, because I'm busy. Quiet down and smoke a cigarette. The helper came in after a while and told Trevor that the frame maker wanted to talk to him. Before leaving, he told Hughie, Don't run away. I'll be back in a moment. While Trevor was away, the old poor man used the time to rest for a moment on a wooden bench behind him. Hughie felt sorry for him because he looked so sad and hopeless, and he looked in his pockets to see how much money he had. An eagle and some coppers were all he could find. He thought to himself, Poor old fellow, he wants it more than I do, but it means no hansoms for 2 weeks. He crossed the studio and gave the beggar the sovereign. The old man stopped, and a thin smile appeared on his dry lips. He said, Thank you, sir. Then Trevor showed up, and Hughie left, a little red from what he had done. He went to spend the day with Laura, got a nice scolding for being too frivolous, and had to walk home. He walked into the Pallet Club that night around 11 o'clock and saw Trevor drinking hock and seltzer by himself in the smoking room. He lit his cigarette and asked Alan, So, did you finish the picture all right? Finished and framed, my boy, Trevor answered. By the way, you have won a battle. You can tell that old model you saw really loves you. I had to tell him everything about you, like who you are, where you live, how much money you make, and what opportunities you have. Hughie cried, My dear Alan, I think I'll find him waiting for me when I get home. Of course you're kidding. Oh, poor old wretch. I wish I could help him. I believe it is terrible for anyone to be so unhappy. There are a lot of old clothes in my closet. Do you think he'd like any of them? Why, his rags were everywhere, Trevor said. But he looks great in them. I would never paint him in a frock coat. Your clothes are called rags to me. What you think of as poverty, I see as beauty. I will, however, tell him about your offer. He looked Alan straight in the eye and said, You painters are a heartless bunch. Trevor answered, An artist's heart is his head. Plus, our job is to make the world what it is, not change it into something else. Each has their own job. Now, let me know how Laura is. The old model was really interested in her. Hughie asked, You don't mean to say you told him about her? Of course I did. He knows everything about the pushy colonel, the beautiful Laura, and the 10,000 pounds. You told that old beggar everything about me, Hughie yelled, his face red and angry. Trevor smiled and said, My dear boy, that old beggar, as you call him, is one of the richest men in Europe. He had enough money in his account to buy all of London tomorrow. He lives in every city, eats on gold plates, and can stop Russia from going to war whenever he wants. What the hell do you mean? Hughie asked. What I say, Trevor replied. Baron Hausberg was the old man you saw today in the studio. People who know him well buy all of my paintings and other works of art. A month ago, he hired me to paint him as a beggar. What do you want? The dream of a millionaire. It was beautiful how he looked in his rags. Or maybe I should say my rags. They're an old suit I bought in Spain. The dog Hughie yelled, "Baron Hausberg!" Oh my God! I gave him a sovereign. He sat down in a couch and looked very upset. Trevor yelled, "Gave him a sovereign!" and laughed so hard that he hurt himself. Baby, you'll never see it again. The money of other people is his business. I think you should have told me, Alan, Hughie said sourly, and not let me look such a fool. Trevor began. Well, to begin with, Hughie, it never occurred to me that you went about giving out charity in that careless way. It makes sense that you would kiss a pretty model, but giving a sovereign to an ugly one? No way. Also, I wasn't really at home today for anyone, and when you came in, I wasn't there either. I wasn't sure if Hausberg would mind if his name was used. He wasn't dressed up, you know. Hughie said, "What a fool he must think I am." No way. After you left, he was in a great mood and kept laughing to himself while rubbing his old, wrinkly hands together. I didn't understand why he wanted to know so much about you before, but now I do. Your sovereign will be invested for you, Hughie. He'll pay you interest every 6 months and have a great story to tell you after dinner. I'm a bad luck devil, Hughie growled. Going to bed is the best thing I can do. And Alan, please don't tell anyone. I'm afraid to show my face in the row. Not true. To Hughie, this is the best proof of how generous you are. Don't run away either. You can talk about Laura as much as you want after you smoke another cigarette. Hughie wouldn't stop, though. He walked home, sad and miserable, making Alan Trevor laugh out loud. The next morning, while he was eating breakfast, a worker brought him a card that said, Monsieur Gustave Naudin, from Monsieur le Baron Hausberg. I guess he's here to say sorry, Hughie thought to himself. He then told the servant to bring the guest in. There was a guy in the room with gold glasses and gray hair. He asked, "Have I the honor of addressing Monsieur Erskine?" in a slightly French accent. Hughie made a bow. He went on, "I have come from Baron Hausberg." He called him the Baron. Hughie stuttered. "I beg you, sir, that you will tell him how sorry I am." The old man smiled and said, "The Baron has asked me to bring you this letter." He then held out a sealed envelope. A wedding gift from an old beggar to Hugh Erskine and Laura Merton was written on the outside. Inside was a check for £10,000. They got married, and Alan Trevor was the best man. The Baron spoke at the wedding breakfast. Alan said, "Though model millionaires are rare enough, model millionaires are even rarer.